Tonight on Reporting Scotland. Despite having no veto, Holyrood rejects Westminster's Brexit legislation, which will trigger the negotiations to leave the EU. After recent claims of historical sex abuse in football, a call for a review of child protection in all Scottish sport. The sister of a missing kayaker says she believes he'll be found alive despite searchers recovering his empty kayak. A warning that maternity services are under growing pressure with an ageing workforce and increasingly complex births. And how Citizens Advice is helping former members of the armed forces who feel abandoned when they return to civilian life.
I would have been treated better if I'd have been taken prisoner of some sort in the Gulf. At least I know I was going to get food from somewhere and they would sort of take care of me if I needed it.
Good evening. The Scottish Parliament has voted overwhelmingly against the move to trigger Britain's exit from the EU. Holyrood can't veto Brexit, but tonight's vote is seen as a challenge to the Prime Minister to pay attention to Scotland, where a majority of people voted to remain in the EU. There were sharp exchanges as Tories accused the SNP of picking a fight in order to promote the prospect of independence. This from our political editor, Brian Taylor.
The final vote was decisive. Don't trigger Brexit now.
Yes, 90, no, 34. There were no abstentions.
Dissenting were the Conservatives and 3 Labour left-wingers. Earlier, the First Minister had billed today's vote as one of the most significant since devolution. Her minister said Scotland need not take a narrow view, but could open up demands for Scotland's pro-EU majority to be heeded.
This is the Scottish Parliament. The people who voted us are Scottish voters. They expect us to stand up for Scotland.
It was, said Mr Russell, a debate about democracy. But John Lamont of the Tories challenged the SNP to accept popular verdicts.
Is it not time for the SNP to accept the results of the EU referendum and, for that matter, the results of the 2014 independence referendum, both of which they were on the losing side of? Is it not time for Mr Russell and the SNP to become born-again Democrats?
But of course Scotland voted to remain in the EU, and that prompted Scottish Labour to counter their Westminster leader and to oppose Brexit until the terms were clarified. But with a challenge to the SNP too.
Building a consensus cannot be done with the threat of a referendum on the table. If they want a positive response across the board, then they should accept that.
The Greens said Scotland should look at the emerging nature of the UK and think long and hard.
Do we want to stick with a country so isolated and in need of allies that holding hands with the bigot in the White House is our best chance of securing a trade deal?
The Liberal Democrats said there must be another EU referendum once the terms of Brexit were agreed.
If we do not have a Brexit deal referendum, we are handing a blank cheque to Theresa May to agree whatever she wants.
So has Holyrood unfurled the flag of insurrection against Brexit? Not at this stage, no. Perhaps rather a reminder that there was majority support in Scotland for continuing links with the European Union. Supporters of independence said tonight there was still time, just, for the Prime Minister to respond.
Well, Brian's still at Holyrood for us this evening. Brian, as you've said, this won't stop Brexit. So what was the point of it?
It has a purpose. Debate always has a purpose, but there's more to it than that. I don't know if you can hear the children's youthful choir behind me there, but it's certainly far from harmonious among the politicians. What Scottish ministers are doing is an iterative, accumulative challenge to the Prime Minister, saying to Theresa May, Scotland voted a different way from the rest of the UK on Brexit, and Scotland demands a differentiated form of treatment in that Brexit deal. Otherwise, they say, of course, implicit in that is the possibility of a further independence referendum. The Conservatives' response to that is to say that Scotland will be treated, Scotland's wishes will be encapsulated, but within an overall UK settlement, and they accuse the SNP of bogus brinkmanship, to which Scottish ministers reply, no. They say they are negotiating in good faith, indeed starting again tomorrow in a meeting with UK ministers.
Brian and your backing singers, thank you very much. Well, meanwhile, at Westminster, the consideration of the bill that will allow the UK government to trigger the process of leaving the EU continues. Our correspondent Nick Eardley is there for us. And a few developments today, Nick.
Yeah, despite that vote in Holyrood tonight, Jackie, it's almost certain that tomorrow MPs will back triggering Article 50. And in contrast to what's happened in Edinburgh, the overwhelming majority of them will back that position. Now, there have been attempts this week to add conditions to giving the Prime Minister the power to start the formal Brexit process. So far, they've all been defeated, including one in the last few minutes, which would have given the Parliament behind me more of a say on the final deal. And there have been some pretty furious exchanges too. Last night there was a discussion about giving the Scottish Parliament more of a formal role in this process. That was defeated. At one point there was a pretty furious row between Alex Salmond, the former First Minister, and the Deputy Speaker in the House of Commons, which I think is just a sense of how passionate some people are about this subject. Now, that debate will continue tonight, it will continue tomorrow, there will be a final vote in the House of Commons tomorrow night. But as I say, I don't think there's any prospect of the direction of travel here changing. Tomorrow, MPs will almost certainly give their final approval for starting the process.
Thank you very much, Nick Eardley. There have been calls for a review of child protection policies throughout Scottish sport following a meeting of the Health and Sport Committee at Holyrood. MSPs and key figures within sport discussed recent claims of historical child sex abuse in football, as well as shortfalls in coaching background checks revealed by BBC Scotland last night. Well, Chris McLaughlin can tell us more.
Scottish swimming and a BBC investigation showing that of 915 coaches who work with children, 170 don't have the required background checks. In fact, in total across Scotland, in all sport, over 1,800 coaches could be working with children without full background scrutiny. And so today at Holyrood, questions from MSPs, answers from governing bodies.
The numbers who are not checked are down to a lag or a delay in that checking process. I have absolute confidence that all those that we state being unchecked will be checked.
But committee members were far from convinced about the current child protection process.
I think there's definitely a case for reviewing the system and seeing if there has to be any amendments to that process to make it much quicker and slicker.
Scotland's national sport was also discussed today, a lack of background checks and also recent allegations surrounding historic child sex abuse.
How deep it is, I think we can only guess, but certainly anecdotally, as I've said in my evidence, that there are, I've been told, ex-professionals who are not willing to come forward because they are a wee bit frightened of the environment, they're frightened of what happens to them next. Do they have to go and speak to the police? Do they have to give evidence in court? What happens if it reaches the newspapers, etc.?
Investigations into child abuse in football continue. So too will talks aimed at preventing abuse in sport in general. More discussions will take place here next week, with formal recommendations to follow. Chris McLaughlin, reporting Scotland.
Hopes are fading for a kayaker who went missing off the Aberdeenshire coast at the weekend. A kayak matching the description of Dominic Jackson's vessel was found yesterday evening south of Wick. However, no trace has been found of the 35-year-old. Craig Anderson sent this report from the Caithness coast.
Well, this is the harbour at Leibster on the Caithness coast, and it was close to here late yesterday that local fishermen found Mr Jackson's kayak. And it's been here and on the other side of the Murray Firth that the search has been continuing for him today. Now, he set off on Saturday, as we understand it, from the harbour at Portsoy. That's 50 miles away on the other side of the Murray Firth. But today the Coast Guard helicopter joined people doing coastal searches to try and see if they could find any trace of him. Now, it has been 3 days, but his family were involved in the search yesterday, and today they maintained that they were still hopeful that he would be found alive.
He's made a decision to swim for shore, and he's clambered ashore along steep cliff somewhere, assessed the situation of how he's going to get out of there, realised his only option is to climb up the cliff, something I know he'd have felt confident doing, and for whatever reason, fingers and toes had gone numb. He slipped and fallen, and I feel strongly he's laid at the base of a cliff somewhere, injured, and unable to move to a visible point for the search and rescue teams.
Now, talking to some of the crew of the Wick lifeboat today, they told me they hadn't been tasked to go out because, well, you can see from the state of the boiling seas here that looking for anything from the water in these small coves perhaps would have been a futile, possibly dangerous exercise. The family of Mr. Jackson have thanked everybody involved in the search for him. They clearly are hopeful that he will be found alive, but as I say, after more than 3 days, hopes must be fading now, and possibly this rescue mission is now turning to a recovery one. Craig Anderson reporting Scotland here at the harbour in Leibster.
Well, meanwhile, high water levels have hampered the search for a missing man reported to have fallen into the River Nith. Emergency services were called out around 9 o'clock on Sunday night after reports of an incident near a rowing club in the Green Sands area of Dumfries. Police have now confirmed the man involved is Brian Cowie from the town's Queensberry Street. Divers have been unable to return to the river after heavy rain, but it's hoped they can resume tomorrow. The liquidators of Rangers Football Club Oldco have launched a multi-million-pound legal action against the company's former administrators. BDO are seeking almost £29 million from accountancy firm Duff & Phelps in a claim at the Court of Session. And I'm joined by our business and economy editor, Douglas Fraser. Douglas, £29 million, that's a lot of money. What's going on there?
Well, we've got to go back 5 years to the point at which the disastrous financial saga at Ibrox came to a head. Having been taken over by Craig White, that was running up unpaid tax bills, it was forced into administration with the accountancy firm Duff & Phelps. Now, it then sold the football club assets onto a company controlled by Charles Green for £5.5 million. And there's plenty of comment at that time that it didn't seem very much for those assets. The corporate entity called Rangers Football Club was then wound up or liquidated by another accountancy firm, BDO, and those accountants have since been trying to secure the funds, any funds with which to repay at least something to creditors. In a statement issued today, BDO is saying that questions arose about the strategy used by Duff & Phelps administrators, and the questions have not been adequately answered. These administrators were subject to a police investigation, but that was dropped last year. So to get answers to this, the liquidators are going to the Court of Session, seeking, as you say, up to £29 million. Why that amount of money? We don't know, but it's certainly enough to get Duff & Phelps' attention. They're going to have to defend themselves in court. Duff & Phelps are saying nothing about it so far today, while over at Ibrox there should be no effect at all on Rangers' football team.
Douglas, thank you. Older mothers, complex births and an ageing workforce are causing maternity services in Scotland to buckle, according to the Royal College of Midwives. They say the maternity services here are good, but that more needs to be done to address the potential for staff shortages. Our health correspondent Lisa Summers has this report.
Okay, Kirsty, do you want to take me through the steps of...
These first-year students at Napier University are in training for life as a midwife.
So this is a pelvic palpation.
But their passion for the profession is about more than learning the skills of the trade.
Birth has such a powerful experience, not just for the mum, also for the baby, and can change the course of our lives, and I want to be part of it.
I can see that there are work pressures and that there is stress and that there is worry that whether they're giving suitable care, but because it's such a passion, I am being prepared for that.
You can work in the labour ward, you can work in the community, you can really go anywhere and do anything with it.
The birth rate in Scotland has remained fairly stable over the past 15 years, but there are increased pressures on maternity services, and here's why. 1 in 5 pregnant women are now obese. That can lead to complications and the need for more support. The biggest increase in births is amongst women in their late 30s, all the while birth rates for women under 25 is falling. And the age of midwives is on the up, with 41% now aged over 50. The Scottish Government's changing the way maternity services are delivered, saying a dedicated midwife will be at the centre.
We get much better outcomes for women and babies, but it's also a better way for midwives to work. There's much higher job satisfaction. But the commitment that we're asking for is that there is enough investment in that change.
And they warn more needs to be done to address the retirement time bomb. Every year, around 650 people apply to do midwifery here at Napier University, but there are only 56 places, and it's one of only 3 universities offering this course in Scotland. So there's certainly not a shortage of applicants, but the question for the Scottish Government is how many places are they willing to fund? Training and recruitment issues are also affecting nurses and doctors. The government says it's working on a plan.
The reason that we're going to be launching a new national workforce plan, the first national workforce plan ever that we've had, is to build on the work that boards have done and make sure that we're planning our workforce not just for the here and now, but looking at that 5 to 10 years.
You want to resuscitate the baby?
It'll be 3 years before these trainee midwives are on the front line of maternity services, putting their passion into practice. Lisa Summers reporting Scotland, Edinburgh.
It's 16 minutes to 7. A reminder now of tonight's top story. Despite having no veto, Holyrood rejects Westminster's Brexit legislation, which will trigger the negotiations to leave the EU. And still to come. A row over the future of farming as the First Minister accuses Westminster of a power grab. A major study on the state of the North Sea oil industry says there are grounds for optimism, with takeover deals stimulating new investment. But the accountants, EY, say the oil and gas supply chain saw its turnover decline through 2015 because of the fall in the price of oil. Our business correspondent David Henderson reports.
It's been a tough few years for oil and gas producers. North Sea rigs have stood idle after a collapse in the oil price, but the impact's been felt far from the North Sea. QMAS, based near Glasgow, make precision tools. Much of their work came from the offshore industry, but as the oil price went down, much of their work dried up.
We have had to be innovative and try and find other ways to get through it. Some of our competitors haven't made it, some have gone by the wayside, some have been bought over. Some have had massively reduced workforces, and so far, and hopefully that's it now, we've escaped all of these.
Today, a new study spells out the damage done to firms which support North Sea production. This supply chain saw its turnover decline in 2015, and the report by EY says last year that trend continued.
The fall in the price of oil has had a dramatic impact right down the supply chain. So this company built this piece of precision engineering, but another firm heat treated the metal, and yet another one provided this protective coating so it won't rust under the sea. So when the work dries up offshore, it affects thousands of companies right across the country.
So where now for the offshore industry and all the jobs which rely on it? Well, the price of oil is key, and one of Scotland's leading oil men thinks the worst has passed.
It now looks like we're back up at, what, $55, $60. I think that's where we expect to be in 2 years' time. I think that's a level, provided we know that's a level, that we'll have some confidence to go ahead and do some planning, because what we need is some investment.
Firms like QMAS have changed focus to cope with the downturn, winning new defence contracts and work in nuclear energy. But like so many others, they'd like orders from the North Sea back in the pipeline. David Henderson reporting Scotland.
Midlothian Council this afternoon became the first council in Scotland to officially decide to put up the council tax. The Band D bill will rise by £36 a year. And in the last hour, Western Isles Council has also agreed a 3% rise. The council tax hasn't gone up anywhere in Scotland since 2007. 4 other councils, including Edinburgh, are expected to reach decisions on Thursday. Now, a look at other stories from across the country. A fatal accident inquiry into the death of a 12-year-old girl killed when a school gym wall collapsed on her is to take place in June. Keane Wallace-Bennett died when a wall in the PE block at Liberton High School in Edinburgh fell down in April 2014. No criminal charges are to be brought, but the Crown Office said an FAI was in the public interest to help avoid such an incident happening again. Parents have been told not to talk to teachers at a Glasgow primary school when dropping off or collecting children. Sandwood Primary in Penilee said there had been a rising number of incidents of family members shouting at staff or using offensive language. Glasgow City Council said a minority of parents had caused problems. The school has set up a new system for contacting teachers and making appointments to discuss concerns. Specialist recovery will be needed to retrieve a lorry carrying part of a wind turbine tower which crashed in Dumfries and Galloway last night. The abnormal load was part of a convoy travelling under escort to the Brockloch wind farm site near Carsfairn. The vehicle overturned on the road between Parton and New Galloway, which is closed in both directions and is likely to remain so for some time. One of Scotland's oldest museums has been upgraded to a 5-star visitor attraction by the National Tourism Body. Surgeons' Hall Museums in Edinburgh, which opened in 1832, now has the highest accolade in Visit Scotland's Quality Assurance Scheme. It was originally developed as a teaching museum for medical students. A row has erupted over the future of agriculture in Scotland after the Scottish Conservative leader, Ruth Davidson, said there could be shared power after Brexit. The First Minister says that amounts to a power grab by Westminster and that all responsibilities currently held by the EU should be devolved. Both leaders have been speaking at NFU Scotland's annual conference in Glasgow, from where our Rural Affairs correspondent Kevin Keane reports.
It's an industry at the heart of the European Union. The Common Agricultural Policy provides subsidies worth more than £3 billion to UK farmers. Many wouldn't even break even without them. And with the black hole that Brexit brings, there's huge concern about how a future farming industry might look. And that's been top of the agenda at this two-day conference in Glasgow. Everyone with questions, few with answers. The First Minister had her own questions too, after the Conservatives suggested a shared power solution over agriculture. That's a prospect which caused her alarm.
Agriculture is completely devolved to the Scottish Parliament right now. It operates within the framework of the Common Agricultural Policy. If that changes because of Brexit, then agriculture policy should still remain with the Scottish Parliament.
The suggestion was made by the Scottish Tory leader Ruth Davidson when she spoke to farmers yesterday. A two-tier system, potentially creating barriers between Scotland and the rest of the UK, she said, would be foolhardy.
I'm pleased to announce that Andrew McCormick is the new president of NFU Scotland.
The presence of Brexit has brought new leadership to the Farmers' Union.
Wow.
Andrew McCormick is a livestock farmer from Dumfries who says it'll be a challenging time.
I want us to get a profitable, sustainable farming into this industry, and we need to be visionary to do that, and we need to look at all the options, have everything on the table, and above all else, the guys that are doing the negotiating, we need to get them to understand our industry.
Brexit was by far the main topic at this week's Farmers' Conference, and it's given them lots to chew over. Kevin Keane reporting Scotland, Glasgow.
18 years in the Royal Navy, active service in the Gulf, but nothing prepared Petty Officer Brian Nichols for the battles he encountered after leaving the forces. Struggling with his finances, he turned to the Armed Service Advice Project run by Scotland's Citizens Advice Network. He said that turned his life around. He was talking to Sally McNair.
This is Brian Nichols' life now. With a heart condition, diabetic and with an allergy to sunlight, largely confined to his home in Rosneath in Argyll and Bute.
During the summer, all of the summer, when the sun's out, I'm in. I can't leave the house at all. I'm living within four walls. My basic thing I do indoors is watch the fish and look after the dogs and watch telly. I can't do anything else.
He moved to Scotland 6 years ago, but soon found himself facing energy bills totalling several £1,000s and involved in disputes over housing and council tax. He went to the Citizens Advice Office in Helensburgh for help.
I've heard of Citizens Advice being good, but I've never had the guts to go there and say, look, I've got this problem. Can I find some help to make it go away? I didn't want to admit that.
In the past 7 years, the Armed Service Advice Project run by CAB has helped 10,000 veterans across Scotland.
Our advisors have the knowledge, have the expertise and the time to really support their clients in a very holistic and full manner, and to also work with other organisations to help them access the support that they need to actually get their lives back on track.
Brian says Sandra, his caseworker, is his angel. But he knows he's been lucky. There are many other ex-military men and women like him, finding life outside the services something they weren't prepared for.
Everything you need in a service is there provided for you. Housing, if you need it, married quarters, food, always 3 meals a day, all the time. What pay you get in your hand is what's left after every bill has been taken out. So you don't even have to think about bills.
The 65-year-old is urging anyone like him to do what he did. He says the service has saved his life. Sally McNair, reporting Scotland, Rosneath on the Gairloch.
Well, let's get an idea now what the weather has in store for us all, Christopher.
Jackie, thank you. Hello there, good evening to you. Well, the trend this week is for easterly winds coming in. That means it's turning rather cold. By Thursday and Friday, 3 or 4 degrees at best by day. Today was quite chilly for some of us as well, with that band of rain, sleet and snow moving far slower than we had thought eastwards, giving a dusting in places. Lots of pictures from our weather watchers, thank you for those. Still though, that rain falling across parts of the Northern Isles, Caithness, the northeast and down the eastern side, wintry in the hills and mountains. Further west, largely dry, but it will be a cold night. Where it's clear, there'll be a frost and some icy patches, perhaps -4 for the central Western Highlands. Elsewhere, not far off freezing, and still windy around those northeast coasts. Tomorrow, it's an east-west split. So eastern areas cloudy and damp through the morning. Further west, cloudy but reasonably dry. And through the course of the day, the wet weather in the east tending to ease off. So by mid-afternoon, say around 3 o'clock, well, yes, it's largely dry, but it's also largely grey, cloudy and a wee bit drab. Best of any brightness likely around the west coast and through the Hebrides. Temperatures 5, 6, 7 Celsius. And after that damp start across eastern areas, largely dry by this point, but still some snow across the Cairngorms. Through the Murray coast and certainly to the northwest of the Great Glen, some sunshine here. Now, the rest of the afternoon into the evening, reasonably dry. Once again, it will be cold and quite windy around the west coast with a strengthening southerly. And as we head overnight, Wednesday to Thursday, little in the way of change. Still, that easterly bringing cold fare, but this weather front bringing some cloud and a few spots of rain across eastern areas. Further west, drier. And certainly Thursday, a sunnier day than we'll see tomorrow. The best of which likely for central and western parts. Further east, cloudier. Again, a few showers at times. But look at the temperatures, 2 to 4 Celsius across the mainland. And Friday, that easterly continues to blow. So it will be another cold day. A few wintry flurries in the east. Further west, likely to have some sunshine at times. That's the forecast for now.
Thank you very much, Christopher. And that's Reporting Scotland from all of us for now. Good evening.